fog hides secrets. But in Connecticut, the dead refuse to stay buried. You know the stories, but you don't know the terror. This is where the Warrens face their demons. These are the top 15 haunted places that own New England's darkness. 1. Sterling Opera House, Darby. The Sterling Opera House in Darby, Connecticut, is a monument to civic ambition and slow decay. Completed in 1889, the granite structure housed not just a grand performance hall, but also the town police, the post office, and municipal offices. It functioned as the heart of the community until 1945, after which the main hall fell silent. Decades of abandonment have intensified the inherent thermal fluctuations and structural shifts within the building. Yet investigators note that the auditory anomalies documented are inconsistent with simple building settling. The basement level, formerly the holding cells for the Darby Police Department, is the epicenter of repeated phenomena. Cold spots registering 35 degrees below ambient temperature are routinely recorded near the barred enclosures. The most consistent narrative involves the residual presence of a young male child, sometimes identified as Little David, whose disembodied laughter is frequently captured on audio recordings. Witnesses who have attempted to communicate with this entity via EVP reported specific, if distressed, vocalizations responding directly to inquiries about the building's disrepair and solitude. While shadow figures are commonly reported traversing the upper balcony, the main stage retains an active, yet melancholic, presence, possibly that of a disgruntled actress or stagehand, left behind when the curtains finally closed. The Sterling's unique confluence of civic function and theatrical drama provides a dense, psychic residue. Documentation reveals high magnetic field readings persisting in areas of low external electrical output, suggesting a consistent, localized energy source that remains tethered to the structure, waiting only for the next trespasser to breach the perimeter security. 1754 House Inn, Woodbury. The structure at 506 Main Street in Woodbury, known today as the 1754 House Inn, retains the heavy architecture of its original purpose as a colonial tavern and stagecoach stop. Its history is well documented, marked by transactions, tax records, and increasingly by anecdotal accounts of residual trauma. The most persistent entity identified by staff and overnight guests is a woman named Alice, believed to have been a chambermaid who lived and died tragically on the property in the late 18th century. Contemporary reports suggest Alice is a subtle yet pervasive presence, often signaled by a distinct, sharp scent of antique lavender that manifests in specific corridors of the second floor, preceding a sudden, localized drop in temperature that resists logical explanation. The activity tends to concentrate around the main floor's fireplace hearth and, most acutely, within room 6. Guests occupying this space frequently report finding the window sashes, secured the night before, raised exactly 3 inches upon waking. Despite the mechanisms being locked, physical manifestations are often associated with domestic objects. A heavy oak rocking chair near the bed has been reliably recorded by infrared motion cameras rocking slowly for up to 20 minutes without any visible draft or vibration. Fragmented letters from the 1790s uncovered in the inn's archives mention the sudden, unexplained departure of a young woman named Alice, lending spectral weight to the contemporary claims of melancholic sightings and shadow figures, visible just outside the perimeter of the room's candlelight. More alarming are the claims involving direct interaction. Several reliable witnesses, including former innkeepers, have described the distinct sensation of being watched intently from the foot of their beds, only for the presence to dissipate instantaneously when the lights are switched on. The common thread in all encounters is not malice, but profound, pervasive sadness, an emotional echo bound irrevocably to the wood and stone of the structure. The 1754 house holds a captive history, a quiet, unrelenting reminder that some deaths are simply transitions into another, colder and far more persistent state of domestic labor. 3. Devil's Hopyard State Park, Ort Wandsee, East Haddam. Devil's Hopyard State Park, located in East Haddam, Connecticut, draws its unsettling reputation from Chapman Falls. The primary features are enormous, cylindrical holes carved into the bedrock immediately downstream from the cascade. Geologists attribute these depressions to glacial meltwater, but local tradition insists they are the scorching remnants left when Satan himself jumped from the precipice. These devil's potholes are deep enough to swallow a man whole, remnants of a literal impact. While some accounts suggest the name derived from a settler attempting to cultivate hops nearby, the park's consistent association with occult activity is hard to dismiss. Rangers and visitors report sudden, inexplicable temperature drops and the distinct odor of sulfur near the riverbanks after dark. This is often preceded by an oppressive silence, a complete lack of natural noise that gives way to auditory hallucinations, distant, muffled chanting that seems to rise from beneath the rocky overhangs surrounding the falls. The precise origin of the Hopyard's energy remains unclear, but the consistency of the phenomena is undeniable. Every autumn, investigators document anomalous magnetic fluctuations around the largest pothole, where the rock face is polished unnaturally smooth. It is not an echo of past ritual that persists here, but rather a persistent presence, seemingly anchored to the physical scars the devil supposedly left in the earth. 4. Newtown Municipal Center, Newtown. The Newtown Municipal Center, formerly the Hawley School 1921, has documented reports of persistent paranormal phenomena focused primarily on a deceased custodian. Accounts from the late 1980s, especially among night crews and police personnel utilizing the original holding cells, frequently reference metallic scraping and the distinct odor of tobacco smoke in non-smoking areas. The focus invariably falls on the basement and the former boiler room, a cold, forgotten section of the old foundation where residual activity appears strongest. The most consistent, unsettling reports concern the sound of heavy keys rattling along linoleum floors or echoing up the main stairwell. This auditory signature has been documented across multiple administrative departments operating on the second and third floors, often conflicting with a building confirmed locked and empty after 10 p.m. A police incident recorded in 1994 involved 2 night patrol officers responding to a third-floor motion alarm. They found the old principal's office door slightly ajar, the thermostat inexplicably set to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and a set of aged janitorial keys resting precisely in the center of the wooden floor, far from any storage. The keys did not belong to the current staff. While the upper floors experience localized poltergeist activity, the basement is defined by heavy silence followed by sudden, localized drops in temperature. Engineers working on HVAC upgrades in 2007 encountered difficulty installing new conduits near the defunct boiler, reporting an unseen, physical resistance pushing back against tools and personnel. The legend dictates that the unnamed custodian, trapped in his final routine, continues to patrol the halls of the municipal center, a perpetual echo searching for the set of keys that slipped from his grasp decades ago in the stone edifice of Newtown. Freak, former site of Remington Arms factory, Bridgeport. The sprawling former Remington Arms complex in Bridgeport defined the scale of American industrial ambition, built primarily to meet the insatiable demands of 2 world wars. Miles of decaying concrete house thousands, manufacturing crucial implements of conflict, millions of rounds, machine guns, and pistols. Safety was secondary to output. Historical records confirm numerous fatalities. Deaths by machinery crush, toxic exposure, and catastrophic boiler failures, this massive site was a pressurized, lethal engine of state necessity, built on human exhaustion. Though the buildings are decommissioned and partially remediated as a Superfund site, the environment remains saturated. Contractors report consistent, documented phenomena. The most disturbing are auditory, the rhythmic whine of non-existent belt conveyors, the distinct smell of spent cordite even in open air, and sudden, intense echoes of shouts that do not correlate to living voices. Security personnel report localized phantom pains, crushing sensations in the chest, or searing burns across the skin in specific zones where accidents occurred decades prior. These experiences are clinically cataloged as site contagion. What lingers is the spectral residue of labor's cost. The ground is unstable, polluted by decades of toxic discharge. Cleanup crews rotate due to mandated psychological protocols. The stripped factory floor is an unnaturally cold space where the echo of frantic production still resonates. The sheer volume of human suffering, compressed into those years of conflict, refuses to dissipate, marking the land as a permanent monument to manufactured death. 6. Union Cemetery, Easton. Union Cemetery in Easton, Pennsylvania, established in the mid-19th century, is known less for the historical figures interred within and more for the persistence of a single, recurrent apparition, the so-called White Lady. This entity is believed by local paranormal researchers to be the tormented spirit of a woman who died shortly after losing her fiancé in the late 1800s. The site of her primary activity is consistently localized around the older, deteriorating mausoleums near the eastern wall, specifically one crypt marked only by the heavily eroded surname Fisher. Reports emphasize not only the visual manifestation, a pale, flowing figure distinct from atmospheric fog, but also profound temperature drops. These environmental shifts occur irrespective of external weather conditions, creating localized pockets of penetrating cold that last several minutes before dissipating rapidly. Experienced local investigators who have set up long-term surveillance have cataloged repeated auditory phenomena. A faint, mournful sobbing that appears to originate from within the heavy stone structures, often preceding the temperature anomalies by several seconds. The consensus among those who study the location is that the White Lady remains bound by overwhelming grief, perpetually searching the grounds for a reunion that never came. Her sorrow, documented through decades of witness testimony and thermal mapping, appears solidified into a physical presence that manifests against the cold granite and marble of Union Cemetery, an eternal fixture of sorrow within the historical landscape. 7. Bara-Hack Ghost Town, Pomfret. The settlement of Bara-Hack, tucked into the hills of Pomfret, Connecticut, presents a documented historical anomaly established around the 1780s. The village experienced a rapid and near-total dissolution by the 1840s, far predating typical post-industrial abandonment. Official records suggest plague or consumption as the immediate cause. Yet local history insists on something profoundly malignant, a pervasive psychological sickness or curse that drove residents mad before killing them. The physical record remains clear: cellar holes and foundation stones, unnaturally cold even in summer, marking the locations where families vanished. The abandonment was not gradual migration. It was a panicked flight from an unseen influence that permeated the soil and the silence. Contemporary accounts detail specific, repeatable auditory anomalies. Visitors frequently report the high, faint wail of an infant emanating from the dense woods near the old central well, a sound often quickly followed by a profound, suffocating silence. More disturbing are the intermittent sightings of spectral black dogs. These are not malicious specters in the traditional sense, but unnaturally silent, large hounds who appear to patrol the foundations, often guiding visitors away from the deepest ruins, seemingly protecting them from the true, unseen entity that lingers. This phenomena suggests a duality, a residual human despair manifesting as the crying child, guarded by something ancient and fiercely territorial. Bara-Hack is characterized by a crippling isolation, exacerbated by the feeling of being intensely monitored. The surviving stone structures feel less like ruins and more like markers for graves. The original inhabitants left behind all but the necessities, abandoning livestock and tools, a desperate retreat from ground deemed irredeemably cursed. Historians hypothesize mass hysteria catalyzed by disease and severe isolation. Those who walk the hollowed ground simply report an unbearable weight and the knowledge that whatever emptied Bara-Hack is neither dead nor dormant. 8. Dudleytown, Cornwall. Dudleytown, Connecticut, was settled in the mid-18th century by descendants of the English aristocracy, a lineage burdened by an alleged 16th century curse stemming from the execution of Lord Guilford Dudley. From its inception, the settlement was ill-fated, built on unforgiving land surrounded by impenetrable forests near Cornwall. Residents quickly noted the peculiar silence of the woods and the oppressive atmosphere. The isolated location, accessed primarily via what would become known as Dark Entry Road, seemed to trap misfortune, manifesting first as failing crops and chronic illness among the populace. The historical record documents a rapid decline defined by catastrophe rather than natural hardship. Families suffered inexplicable madness. One farmer, severely disturbed, reportedly wandered into the woods and vanished. A major shift occurred during the 19th century when disease outbreaks and sudden structural fires accelerated the exodus. The belief solidified among the remaining inhabitants that the land itself was inherently evil, a nexus of malign, unseen forces responsible for the relentless cycle of death. By 1900, Dudleytown was utterly derelict, all structures reclaimed by the forest. Today, despite being private property and heavily guarded, the ruins continue to draw attention. Reports from individuals who have bypassed the gates often cite unexplained visual anomalies, sudden fluctuations in temperature, and an unnerving feeling of being physically pushed or struck. The site is rarely referred to as abandoned, but rather as actively occupied by whatever force consumed the original settlement. Gunntown Cemetery, Naugatuck. Gunntown Cemetery, established in 1785 on a secluded ridge in Naugatuck, Connecticut, remains a prime location for residual and intelligent haunting phenomena, according to regional paranormal groups. The site's primary reputation centers on the spirit of Hannah, a distinct, localized apparition whose presence has been consistently reported for decades. Local historical accounts suggest Hannah was likely Hannah Hoadley, interred here in the early 19th century, though the specific tragedy tied to her restlessness remains debated. The most circulated narrative claims Hannah perpetually searches the rugged grounds for her infant child, purportedly buried elsewhere or stolen shortly after her own death, leaving her bound to the cemetery's perimeter. Visitors often report a profound, localized temperature drop and the distinct sound of a woman weeping near the oldest section of field stones. Even on warm, still nights, evidence collected by multiple investigations suggests that Hannah's movement focuses specifically on the wrought iron front gate and the low stone wall bordering Gunntown Road. Security footage, analyzed under controlled conditions, has periodically documented a vague, tall shadow passing laterally across the gate after midnight. Crucially, the spirit seems to react specifically to sound. The noise of a car engine idling or the audible speaking of a child's name frequently precedes visual sightings of a pale, indistinct figure hovering briefly above the stone wall before dissolving into the shadows of the nearby woods. These documented encounters emphasize an undeniable maternal desperation, suggesting the entity's primary drive is a relentless territorial search pattern. The site's enduring atmosphere of sorrow is compounded by numerous reports of auditory phenomena, including faint, rhythmic rocking sounds emanating from the center of the grounds when no wind is present. These acoustic anomalies are not simply echoes, they are localized and consistent, often accompanied by the subtle smell of dried lavender or decaying cloth, scents historically associated with burial linens of the period. Gunntown Cemetery functions not merely as a repository for the dead, but as a perpetual stage for a single, tireless tragedy. The relentless, documented search for a lost child ensures that the grounds are never truly unoccupied, maintaining its reputation as Naugatuck's most actively troubled burial ground. 10. Bush-Holley House, Greenwich. The Bush-Holley House in Greenwich, Connecticut, dates back to the 1730s, its foundations having absorbed 3 centuries of intense human activity. First as the bustling Bush Tavern during the Revolutionary War, and later as the heart of the renowned Coscob art colony, this complex history has left an indelible, chilling impression. Staff and preservationists often report a crushing atmospheric density in the oldest sections, particularly near the main staircase where, legend holds, General Putnam once narrowly evaded British capture. It is here that the heavy, methodical pacing of 18th century boots is routinely heard after closing hours, echoing through the wood, despite the lack of any living occupants on the upper floors. These sounds are often accompanied by sudden, drastic drops in temperature, localized pockets of cold suggesting a lingering, localized energy trying desperately to move through the restricted spaces of the former inn. The spectral residue of the tavern years is mirrored by the quiet despair of the later art colony period. On the second floor, the consistent presence of a woman, usually manifesting as a momentary shadow or a fleeting scent of aged perfume, is frequently documented in the rooms once occupied by the Holley family. Security logs include accounts of objects subtly shifted or the distinct, melancholic sound of a distant piano originating from the gallery space when the building's power is confirmed deactivated. Researchers speculate this entity is Eliza Holley, unable to release her attachment to the site that nurtured so many artists, but ultimately consumed her family's fortunes. Yet, the true dread resides in the cramped, low-ceilinged attic, a space where residual anguish seems most potent. Visitors and maintenance workers describe an overwhelming sense of being intensely scrutinized, often accompanied by the subtle, cold breath of something unseen against the neck, followed by a sudden, irrational urge to flee the enclosure. The Bush-Holley House doesn't merely contain its history. It actively traps the emotional echoes of its inhabitants, manifesting them as palpable surveillance and the unending repetition of forgotten, tragic moments. 11. Yankee Pedlar Inn, Torrington. The Yankee Pedlar Inn in Torrington, Connecticut, built in 1891, is a prominent Victorian fixture whose history is intrinsically linked to documented tragedy. Numerous staff reports and rigorous paranormal investigations confirm the presence of multiple active hauntings, disturbing the inn's operation for decades. Originally the Howard House, the structure functions as an unwitting holding cell for spirits bound by sudden, traumatic ends. Electromagnetic anomalies and disembodied voices are consistently reported across all 3 floors, spiking particularly near known centers of fatal incidents recorded in early 20th century ledgers. The most persistent case involves the spirit of a young bride, known only as Alice. Historical records suggest she died tragically in room 330 on her wedding night, found deceased in the clawfoot tub after her husband abandoned her. Guests report a debilitating sense of sorrow, the distinct scent of old perfume, and the sound of muffled weeping originating from the empty bathroom. The most physical manifestation is an extreme, localized cold spot concentrated near the tub, regardless of the building's internal heating, suggesting her spectral presence is immutably tied to the site of her drowning. This sustained activity is supplemented by the apparition of a former actor seen near the grand staircase, and consistent reports of staff finding freshly made linens removed and neatly folded on the floor of specific haunted rooms. For over a century, the inn has served the community, while functionally transitioning into a locus where guests arrive, a documented, permanent residence tied irrevocably to the structure by their traumatic, sudden departures, remain unable to check out. Sites: Boardman House Inn, Bed and Breakfast, East Haddam. The Boardman House Inn, established in East Haddam, is routinely cited in paranormal documentation as a nexus of intelligent haunting, primarily centering on the entity known locally as Clara. Built in the 1860s, the Victorian structure retains much of its original architecture, a historical shell conducive to residual psychic energy. Investigators have consistently logged verifiable temperature anomalies and electromagnetic field spikes, often correlating with reports from paying guests. The activity is not relegated to a single location. Rather, it permeates the common areas and the upper floors, suggesting a territorial persistence. Witnesses, regardless of prior belief, report an overwhelming sense of observation, a persistent scrutiny that dissolves the comfort of privacy inherent in the stay. This pervasive unease transitions into outright interaction, which is where the documentation becomes unsettlingly consistent. The most frequently reported phenomena involve direct, often antagonistic communication. Guests in rooms 3 and 5 have documented the sound of heavy, period-appropriate fabrics sweeping across the wooden floors when no living person occupies the hallway. Items placed on bedside tables, particularly books or personal effects, are frequently relocated overnight, sometimes appearing openly displayed or strategically hidden. Staff report a constant management of objects displaced by unseen hands, salt shakers, keys, and glassware. Photographic evidence taken by amateur investigators often shows inexplicable light distortions and the distinct appearance of orbs, sometimes congregating near the antique rocking chair in the parlor, a piece allegedly favored by Clara during her life. This intelligence appears focused on disruption and asserting presence, lacking any discernible malevolence, yet radiating an undeniable, profound loneliness that chills those it targets. The inherent terror of the Boardman haunting is its mundane nature. It is integrated into the daily operations of the inn, a scheduled, predictable terror that guests knowingly pay to experience. The true horror manifests only when a guest awakens at 0 a.m. to a cold spot pressing down on their chest, realizing the historical record they came to observe is actively observing them back, utilizing the very architecture of their room as its conduit. The door remains locked, yet the sense of intrusion is absolute, leaving one with the clinical certainty that the 1860s never fully ended within those walls. 13. Grave of Midnight. Mary Evergreen Cemetery, New Haven. Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven, Connecticut, contains the grave of Mary E. Hart, popularized as Midnight Mary. Records confirm her death in 1872, but the local legend persists regarding a severe cataleptic state prevalent in the Victorian era. The core horror is intrinsically medical and historic. The very real possibility that Mary was mistakenly interred while suffering only from temporary suspended animation, a chilling yet plausible fate, given the limited pathology of the period. The legend gained virulence from the inscription on her monument, a misquotation of Job 34:20, reading, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." Local folklore explicitly warns that approaching her grave at 12:00 a.m. invites fatal consequences. The curse states that visitors who read the stone exactly at the midnight hour will die within the subsequent year, a belief reinforced by persistent anecdotal accounts of sudden malaise and mechanical failures near the site. Paranormal researchers frequently target this location, documenting sharp, localized thermal anomalies centered directly above the burial plot. These temperature drops often coincide with claims of auditory disturbances, specifically low, rhythmic thudding or faint, muffled cries originating from beneath the earth. The continuing ambiguity of Mary's final hours transforms this simple New Haven headstone into a precise geographical marker for profound historical dread. 14. Stepney Cemetery, Monroe. The Stepney burial ground, a silent expanse within the historic parish, was never a peaceful sanctuary. By the mid-Victorian era, driven by relentless overcrowding and the desperate need for cheap land, this area functioned as a repository for the casualties of urban blight. The soil is not merely earth, it is a dense composite of clay, quicklime, and the disturbed remains of thousands of paupers. Interred 7 deep in some sections, the administrative logs meticulously record the relentless volume. Victims of the 1832 cholera epidemic, infants lost to consumption, and the endless stream of nameless poor. Digging here was and remains an unsettling proposition. Reports from 1850 detail the necessary practice of breaking bones to fit new coffins, an economic necessity detailed without emotion in the parish records. This historical density, this forced proximity of the dead, establishes a foundational trauma that transcends mere decay. Local folklore persistently recounts the presence of a woman in black, or sometimes a translucent shroud, often sighted near the southern boundary walls, a phenomenon frequently dismissed as atmospheric suggestion or residual light refraction. However, the documented accounts often share specific, unnerving details, an overwhelming scent of ammonia and decay accompanying the visual disturbance. Geotechnical surveys have attempted to correlate this persistent odor with gas buildup from organic decomposition below, yet the timing of the sightings often contradicts predictable geological venting patterns. The consensus among long-term residents is that the atmosphere of the ground is permanently charged, a reflection of the acute suffering documented during the period of peak interments, when the groundskeeper staff complained of auditory hallucinations of distant, muffled weeping. Today, the cemetery maintains a deceptive calm, its quiet lawns concealing the profound historical density beneath. But the documentary evidence of the past is undeniable. This was a landscape defined by economic failure and epidemiological disaster, a place where the dead were disposable commodities. The terror of Stepney is not a monstrous apparition, but the certainty that the ground itself is saturated with the residual echo of mass desperation. Those who walk the perimeter after dusk often report a persistent cold spot, localized and intense, a chilling counterpoint to the city's heat, a clinical anomaly that refuses to dissipate, a permanent record etched into the earth. 50. Seaside Sanatorium, Waterford. The Seaside Sanatorium in Waterford, designed by Cass Gilbert, opened in 1934 to treat patients suffering from tuberculosis. The imposing Art Deco structure, positioned overlooking Long Island Sound, was initially intended as a therapeutic haven where fresh salt air was prescribed for chronic illness. Instead, the facility became synonymous with protracted suffering, isolation, and eventual institutional neglect. Following its definitive closure in 1996, the sprawling campus quickly devolved into a ruinous monument to unresolved distress, its extensive history of death and quarantine proving fertile ground for residual hauntings. Particularly related to the young patients treated there in the mid-century, investigators and local police have noted the consistent, oppressive atmosphere within the derelict structure Accounts invariably describe extreme localized cold spots and the unnerving scent of copper and decay in the abandoned wards. Electronic voice phenomena captured in the former isolation rooms allegedly feature labored, wet breathing and faint, high-pitched sobbing, often attributed to the quarantined child patients who died within the building. Shadows resembling nurses are frequently reported traversing the fourth-floor corridor, an area paradoxically maintained in unnaturally pristine condition, despite decades of abandonment. The most disturbing recurring event involves the main hall after midnight, the distinct, loud sound of a metal gurney being rapidly wheeled across the tiled floor, only to stop abruptly outside the locked operating theater. Trespassers report a chilling, heavy pressure, sometimes accompanied by the phantom scent of chloroform and surgical disinfectant, as if unseen hands were restraining them in the infirmary beds. The sanatorium's walls continue to contain the echoes of its residents' final struggles, preserved not by medicine, but by the salt air and the memory of their despair. Whether you believe the chilling tales or remain skeptical, Connecticut certainly holds its share of spectral secrets. But the stories don't end with this countdown. These 15 locations are just the beginning. If you're ready to dive deeper into the darkness and see the actual paranormal evidence we captured using our own equipment, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our next video takes us inside one of these legendary haunts for a real-time investigation. And trust us, you won't want to miss what we found lurking in the shadows. Until then, sleep tight, if you can